Do you want to know how to study double the amount of material in half the time? Hello, I am Mrs. Mikey, and I will be your teacher today for ACE Psychology. When taking paper 1 and 2, you're going to have to evaluate terminology. This means you're going to have to know the strengths and weaknesses of the vocabulary, not just the definition, but the strengths and the weaknesses of using those in studies. So it's safe to say that there are a lot of terms that you have to define. When you pair certain terminology like qualitative data and quantitative data, lab experiment, field experiment, nature, nurture, individual differences versus situational differences, longitudinal versus snapshot, you can even get down into the nitty-gritty vocabulary like overt versus covert observation, or closed versus open questions and questionnaires, structured versus unstructured interviews. Now, I want you to take those pairings, all the pairings that I said, and I want you to choose only one of those words. So you might choose qualitative data, longitudinal study, field experiment, situational, and so on, for whatever vocabulary that you can find that are or seem opposing. Now, I'm going to do this example with qualitative versus quantitative data. Say you chose qualitative data to study and you're not going to study quantitative data because you don't have to. Once you figure out what the strengths of qualitative data are and the weaknesses of qualitative data, here's some examples. A strength of qualitative data could be that we get really detailed, in-depth looks at people's behaviors or emotions. A weakness of qualitative data is that we cannot quantify it. Data that is not quantified is harder to interpret and it's harder to maintain its reliability. So knowing those strengths and weaknesses, you basically just flip them around for quantitative data. So a strength of quantitative data is that you can quantify it. You can turn it into a mean, median, or mode and find a standard deviation. You can also make the study more replicable. But a negative or a weakness of quantitative data is that we can't find in-depth data. We may not find detailed data. We may be left with questions like why or how. Let's do another example using field and laboratory experiments. So say you're just going to study field experiments. A strength of a field experiment is that participants are more likely to behave more natural in their natural environment. And this is going to increase ecological validity, which is going to increase generalizability. But a weakness of field experiments is that it lacks controls and tends to lack standardized procedures. These standardized procedures are going to help increase reliability, and the controls are going to help increase validity. Knowing that field and labs are basically opposite, now you do know that laboratory experiment strengths have to do with the controls and the standards, while the weaknesses are going to lack things like ecological validity, which may lower the generalizability, but there may also be low mundane realism, which is the act of, or the likelihood of the act, whatever the participant is doing, to be done in real life. So I hope you start to understand the pattern here. You only need to study one of the two pairings in order to know the strengths and the weaknesses of both. For more psychology tips and tricks, make sure to follow me at ACE Psychology. And if you need a class to belong to, I have a Patreon class /ACE Psychology. See you there.